Hello, guys. I want to say welcome once again to today's class. And in today's class, we will continue with what we've been doing before or what we talked about in the last class. In the last class, if you can remember vividly, we talked about or we introduced the topic Pteridophyta. And I said that Pteridophyta is one of the groups of plants. We have five groups of plants: the schizophyta, the talophyta, bryophyta, pteridophyta, and the spermatophyta. So we've talked about all these other groups: the schizophyta, the talophyta, the bryophyta, in our previous classes, and we are now talking about pteridophyta. So I did mention that pteridophyta has four different classes, and each of these classes also has representatives. For instance, we have the Psilotopsida. The Psilotopsida is one of the first class and the most primitive. Then it has the Psilotum and Lycopodium as examples. Then we have the second one, which is called the Lycopsida, which of course has many others, the Lycopodium and the Isoeteus. Then we have the third class, which is called the Sphenocida or Epicetinae, where you have uh, the Epicetum as an example. Then we also have the Pteropsida. Of course, it has two subclasses: Pteropsida or Felicinae, the eusporangiate and the leptosporangiate, and have so many others: the Ophioglossales, the Osmondeus, the Malachiels, the uh, Phylloceus, the Salvines, and Marzilius. So these are what we did in our previous class. So today we want to be looking at each of the representatives of all the classes of Pteridophyta. So the first one I want to look at is the Psilotum. Psilotum. And we want to look at the characteristics of this Psilotum. What are some of the features you can use to identify this group of plants or this plant that is called a Psilotum? The first characteristic is the fact that they have monoecious gametophyte. Of course, you have what is called the alternation of generation. Well, higher plants alternate between the sporophytic stage and the gametophytic stage. But then, if you look at the gametophyte, which is also called the prothallus of this Psilotum, we are still going to come to that when we get a life cycle. I'm just listing out the characteristics. You discover that the male and the female sexual organs are located on a single prothallus, and that makes it to be monoecious. That means that there is a mixture, that is a collection of both male and female sexual organs. A minute. There's collection of male and female sexual organs on a single prothallus that makes it to be monoecious. Then another characteristic is the fact that their vegetative reproduction is through uh, two different methods. One is by fragmentation of the rhizome. They have rhizome, uh, and this is underground rhizome that gets fragmented, and each of the fragments will result to the birthing of another plant. That is vegetative reproduction. Then the same another method of reproduction through this vegetative method or through this vegetative propagation is by the formation of oval multicellular gymae, which is usually formed on the surface of the prothallus or the rhizome. You have these gymae cups that are found on the surface of the rhizome or prothallus. Through that, uh, Psilotum can also reproduce vegetatively or through vegetative propagation. Then some members of this group grow as epiphytes. That means that they're epiphytic, meaning that they grow with the help of support from other plants, and some grow as terrestrial organisms. Somebody will now say epiphytes, not terrestrial organisms, not exactly the same. When you say an epiphyte, that means the root or the rhizoid of that plant does not get into the soil. It grows by the help or the support of other neighboring plants. But a terrestrial plant is the one who is a type whose roots are rooted into the soil. That means they take water and nutrient directly from the soil without the support of any neighboring plant. So that's just a basic difference between the terrestrial one and the epiphytic one. So I just mentioned this, the ones I mentioned are not listed here, and that was why I now started with them. There's some of these characteristics. I will now begin to look at the ones I've listed here. So remember, the first three I've just mentioned now. One, monoecious gametophyte. Then two, vegetative propagation through uh, uh, the fragmentation of the rhizome and through the formation of oval multicellular germinae on the surface of the rhizome or the prothallus. Then the last one I mentioned is the fact that some grow as epiphytes while some grow as terrestrial plants or organisms. Then let's now start with what we have here. We are still talking about the characteristics of Psilotum. Another important characteristic of Psilotum is what is called the presence of synangium. The presence of synangium. If you look at the Psilotum plant, you're going to see what is something that looks like this. If you can see what I just drew now. So this is the stem, and on this stem, you're going to see something that has three-sided shapes. That is called triocular sporangium. Triocular, triocular sporangium. So another name for triocular sporangium is the synangium. So this synangium also means sporangium, but it means sporangium that has three-sided shapes. That has three sides, sorry. A sporangium that has three sides, 1, 2, 3. So triocular sporangium is a specific feature, a diagnostic feature of members of this Psilotum, because you can't see it in Lycopodium, you can't see it in Epiphytic, you can't also see it in the Dryopteris. These are other representatives of the classes which we'll still talk about. So this is the first characteristics that I've written here. Then the second one is that they show dichotomous branching. They show dichotomous branching. Dichotomous branching. So Psilotum shows what is called dichotomous branching. And when we say dichotomous branching, that means that their branching is usually in twos. Their branching is usually in a pair, kind of. They show, can see this is two, this is two, this is two. So they show dichotomous. Di means two, branching in pairs, kind of. So this is how it looks like. Let me see if we have the picture of Psilotum here. So you can see this is Psilotum. This is how it branches. This is 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So it usually grows into various forms. Then another one is the complete absence of roots. The complete absence of roots is still another characteristic of Psilotum. They don't have roots, they have rhizoids. The rhizoids perform the functions of roots. Unlike in the case of Lycopodium, Lycopodium have roots, they have adventitious roots. So, and of course, you know that most of these features that are not found in Psilotum will be found in Lycopodium and possibly in Equisetum and Dryopteris, because as plants advance, they get more sophisticated structures that are usually not found in the most primitive ones. Remember I said that Psilotum is the most primitive, whereas Dryopteris is the most advanced. Then another one is terminal sporangia. Terminal sporangia. The sporangium is usually found at the apex of this stem. At the apex of this stem. That is where you see the triocular sporangium. And because it is found at the apex of the stem, that is why it is called terminal, at the terminal region of the sporangia. Then another characteristic is the fact that they are homosporous or homospory. Now, in all the members or classes of Pteridophyta, Psilotum is homosporous, Lycopodium is homosporous, Equisetum is homosporous. But coming to Dryopteris, some members of Dryopteris are, and when I say Dryopteris, so first, when let me say Pteridophyta as a class, because Dryopteris is just one example of all the many examples that are found under the class Pteridophyta. So in that case now, you see that some members of the class Pteridophyta are homosporous, while some are heterosporous. So let me repeat what I said now. I said all members of Psilotum are homosporous. And what does it mean to be homosporous? It means that they produce one kind of spore. In the case of heterosporous, they produce two different kinds of spores. That is when you begin to hear about the microspore and the megaspore. So, but in this case, they produce one kind of spore. So I said all members of Psilotum are homosporous, they produce one kind of spore. All members of Lycopodium are homosporous, they produce one kind of spore. All members of Sphenocida produce one kind of spore, they are homosporous. Then coming to Pteropsida, some members are homosporous, while some are heterosporous. Then another characteristic is the fact that they show homomorphic type of alternation or generation. They show homomorphic type of alternation or generation. This is also essentially important. This is essentially important. So what does it mean to have homomorphic type of alternation or generation? It means that there's resemblance uh, between the sporophyte and the gametophyte. Unlike in the case of fern and most other advanced plants, you discover that the sporophyte is large, leafy, and more sophisticated compared to the gametophyte, and you see a great distinction or difference or gulf discrepancy between the sporophyte and the gametophyte. But in the case of Psilotum, the sporophyte is not too different, or there is similarity between uh, uh, the morphology, sorry, of the sporophyte and the gametophyte. That is what we mean by homomorphic, morphological, homo, one. So resemblance, there's great resemblance between the sporophyte and the gametophyte in the case of Psilotum. Then the next one is that members of Psilotum also, their xylem is made up of annular and spiral tracheids only. You know, when we talk about the xylem is a complicated structure, a complex structure, a complex tissue that plants use for the purpose of absorption of water and nutrients from the soil. And as plants advance, their xylem becomes more complex and sophisticated. So the xylem of gymnosperm is not as complex as that of angiosperm, and similar thing happens in the case of Pteridophyta. So the two major cells that are usually found in the xylem are the vessels and the tracheids. These are the two cells that help or perform the function of absorption of nutrients and water. So, but in the case of Psilotum, which is example of Pteridophyta, their xylem lacks vessels. They only have tracheids and lack vessels, and the vessels has a ring-like structure. That is what is called the annular, and they are ring-like in structure, also a spiral structure or in shape. That is what we mean by xylem made up of annular and the spiral tracheids only. Then there's absence of cambium and no secondary growth. Of course, there are two main types of growth in a plant. We have the primary growth when a plant increases in height, that is primary growth. Then when a plant begins to increase in girth or what in girth or width, eh, that is what we call the secondary growth. And the cambium powers is one of the cells tissues that power this secondary growth. Then remember I've said that they lack roots, but they have the rhizoids. But then they also have what is called the rhizome. The rhizome. the rhizome is protostelic. I think we've talked about stele. So the I don't need to go into talking about stele again. The protostelic, if you can remember, we talked about the haplostele, the actinostele, the plectostele, the mistele. All these are examples of the protostele where there's absence of roots, and because there's absence of pith, and because there's absence of pith, the xylem now forms the central column or occupies the position of the pith. So that kind of stele is found in the rhizome of Psilotum, whereas the siphonostele is the kind of stele that you see in the stem. So these are the of uh, characteristics of Psilotum. Characteristics of Psilotum. Then the next thing we'll now talk about is that of Lycopodium. I would have gone into the life cycle of Psilotum, but let me quickly talk about the Lycopodium, after which I will now come and talk about the life cycles of both Psilotum and the Lycopodium. So I will quickly talk about the characteristics of Lycopodium, then I'll now come back to Psilotum. So while talking about life cycles, I'll talk about life cycles of the two. So I'm talking about these characteristics of these two now. So I want us to look at the Lycopodium. The Lycopodium. Now, if you look at the Lycopodium is also very similar to the Psilotum, also very similar to Psilotum, but we have few differences. The first characteristics I mentioned in the case of Psilotum is the the fact that I mean Psilotum now, they they have now we're talking about Lycopodium. So just listen carefully because there are some of these characteristics that are similar, then some are not. So that is what I want to point out quickly. When it comes to Lycopodium, the synergium is not found in Lycopodium because I told you that in Psilotum they 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 have triocular sporangium, and that triocular sporangium is also called a synangium. So in the case of Lycopodium, there is absence of that synangium. There's absence of synangium. Absence of synangium. Since there's absence of synangium, that means that the sporangium are born on uh, the sporangioferous spike and on the sporophyll. What do I mean? What do I mean by this? There's what we call reproductive branch. Hmm? There's what we call reproductive branch in the case of Psilotum. The case of Lycopodium, sorry. There's what we call a reproductive branch. And this reproductive branch, this is just a sketch. Hmm? You don't have so much space. This is just a sketch. So in this case now, you discover that in the case of Lycopodium, you discover that they have a stem, hmm, or a branch. Let's call it a branch, a reproductive branch. And this reproductive branch is called sporangy. Sorry, I hope you can see this clearly. Uh-huh. All right. So this is sporangiferous spike or strobulus. So this is a sporangiferous spike. Then the reproductive leaf, that is called a sporophyll. The reproductive leaf that is called a sporophyll. So this is a sporophyll. This is a sporophyll now. The sporophyll. So this is sporophyll. So the sporophyll, the sporophylls are attached to the sporangiferous spike or the strobulus, and the sporangium is now found right inside the sporophyll. So the sporangium are not attached at the apex of the stem only or form a triangular shape. No. So you can see the difference now. The difference is that there is now a presence of reproductive branch and reproductive leaf that is called the sporophyll. You can see that this is the case of Lycopodium. This is the reproductive branch which I've mentioned. They can see the sporophyll. Then inside these sporophylls, you see now, you now see the sporangium. And inside the sporangium, of course, you now see the spores. So the sporangium are born on the sporangiferous spike that has some sporophylls attached to it. This is different from that of Psilotum that has a synangium that are terminally positioned. Then that is one characteristic that is different. Then another one is in the case of Psilotum, we said complete absence of roots. But in the case of Lycopodium, there's presence of roots. They have roots. That's the second characteristic. There's presence of roots. In the case of Lycopodium, there's presence of roots. Where is my marker misbehaving? Presence of roots. So roots are found here. Then, of course, I've talked about this terminal sporangia, that there's something like terminal sporangia. The sporangia are born on the sporangiferous spike and by extension on the sporophyll. Then we also have homospory. I've mentioned this. This is another characteristic. So let me clean this one. There is no uh, terminal sporangia. Presence of root. Then homospory. This is another characteristic of Lycopodium. They are homosporous. I've explained this. The homomorphic type of alternation of generation is also the case of Lycopodium, even though there is slight difference between the sporophyte and the gametophyte, but they are still similar. And because they are still similar, we can still say that they possess or exhibit homomorphic type of alternation of generation. So that's another characteristic of Lycopodium. Then there's an absence of cambium and no secondary growth in the case of Lycopodium. There's an absence of cambium and no secondary growth in the case of Lycopodium. So you can see that some of these characteristics are very similar. And another characteristic which is also important is the fact that some members of Lycopodium are epiphytes, or epiphytic, while some are terrestrial. Then I've also mentioned that they have a reproductive branch, which of course is not found in Psilotum. They also have reproductive leaf, which of course is not found in Sporangium. That reproductive branch is called, let me put it again, Sporangiferous spike. Then the reproductive leaf is called the sporophyll. The sporophy. The sporophy. The Lycopodium is commonly called the club moss. The club moss. The common name is club moss. It's commonly called the club moss. And they grow as epiphytes the on the top of hills. On the top of hills, that is where you see them. Then they are herbaceous. They are herbaceous. They are herbaceous, and they are herbaceous. Have creeping rhizome. They have a kind of rhizome that creeps on the ground. That means trailing on the ground. Then the branches are covered by numerous small spirally arranged leaves that are pointed. So let me show you that. Their branches are covered by spirally arranged leaves that are pointed. Look at this spirally arranged leaves. And these spirally arranged leaves that are found on them are usually arranged very well and are also pointed. They are arranged and pointed. So that's what it means by saying that their branches are covered by numerous small spirally arranged leaves that are pointed. Then I've mentioned that some species are epiphytic, just like Psilotum, while some are terrestrial. Then in the xylem, the xylem also has only trachea. There's no vessel. Then there are herbaceous plants. Of course, we have two different types of plants according to the classification of Hutchinson. Hutchinson said we have the lignosae and the herbaceae. The lignosae are the woody plant, and the herbaceae are the herbaceous plant. So Psilotum and Lycopodium, and in fact all members of Pteridophyta fall under herbaceous plant. Then of course their family is called Lycopodaceae. 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 That is a family. Lycopodaceae. I think there's I here. Lycopodaceae. That is a family of Lycopodium. That's a family of Lycopodium. So, having done this now, the next thing to talk about is to go back and now talk about the life cycles of these plants. The life cycles of these plants. So I will draw the life cycle of Psilotum and also that of, just a minute. So the life cycle of Psilotum, So this is the Psilotum plant. Then it has synangium. Then it has the spore mother cell. They'll have the spores, which develop into the prothallus, and of course the prothallus has the archegonium, then antheridium. Archegonium produces the egg. The antheridium produces the anterozoite. I hope you understand this the way I'm doing it. So this is anterozoite. This is the egg. Then of course, the two mate together to form zygote or oospore. Then it grows into an embryo and a Psilotum plant. So all these stages, from these down to spores, are the gametophyte. They have n number of chromosomes. And this is sporophyte. This is sporophyte having 2n number of chromosomes. This is the gametophyte. Gametophyte having n number of chromosomes. So let me explain this. Let me explain this. So these are the rhizoids, the rhizoids. Then here you have the antheridium. Then here we'll have the achegonium. So the life cycle of Psilotum begins by the uh, the formation of synangium. Of course, they have synangium, which I said is triangular sporangium. Then the synangium or the sporangium, the triangular sporangium, when the spores are mature, they hiss. The hiss means break. They break and the spores are being released. But don't forget that the spores itself are produced. The spores are produced from the help of the spore mother cell. So for every time you are writing the life cycle of a plant, you must include the spore mother cell before the spores are being released. So these are the spores, and these spores will not germinate. Let me remove this gametophyte so that not. So just know that the whole of this is gametophyte. So these spores will not germinate into prothallus, and this is the prothallus, the shape of the prothallus of Psilotum. This prothallus has root-like structure, which are called the rhizoids, and of course that is what they use to to get nutrients from the soil. So, and on the surface, superficially, on the surface of the prothallus, you're going to see two different sexual organs. The anteroedium, of course, you know, is a male sex organ. Then the achegonium is a female sex organ. The 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 achegonium is spherical in shape, and it has two major parts: the neck and the venter. It has two major parts: the neck and the venter. The neck and the venter. The venter is spelled as this: venter. Now, the egg of this plant is located within the venter of the achegonium. So, during when if fertilization is to occur, then of course the uh, antheridium is released, and once the antheridium is released, with the help of water or dew, it flows down inside. No, look at it here. This is antheridium. Once it is released and it is multiciliate, the anterozoids, there are many anterozoids. So anterozoids are produced from antheridium. So there are many anterozoids that usually produce. These anterozoids, once they are produced with the help of water, so water is essential for fertilization. Remember we mentioned that in the characteristics of Pteridophyta, water is essential for fertilization. So with the help of water or dew, the anterozoids will now flow into the achegonium through the neck side, into the venter. And we also told that there is an acid within the achegonium that also helps to attract the anterozoids. That acid is called the malic acid. The malic acid. The malic. M-A. The malic acid. This is MALIC. or the mucilage. I think it's called the mucilage. The malic acid or the mucilage. I hope I'm showing it this night. Just said. So once the sperm gets into the achegonium, then fertilization occurs. But it's just one heterozoid that finally fertilizes the egg. And of course, the zygote in plant is called the oospore. Remember, zygote is a general term for both plant and animal, but specifically in plant, it's called oospore. Then the zygote grows into an embryo, then the embryo into a psilotum. So this is the life cycle of psilotum. I don't want this video to be too long. What's the time? Okay, 35. So I hope this makes sense. I hope this makes sense. I hope this makes sense. Just a minute. So we want to look at the life cycle, of Lycopodium. The life cycle of Lycopodium is what we want to look at now. Okay, so the life cycle of Lycopodium. 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 Oh, I should have even cleaned this. It's a bit similar. So this is the Lycopodium plant. It has, so let me write strobulus. Since they're the same thing, strobulus. Remember I said it's also called sporangiferous spike. Then sporophyll. Then sporophyll. Remember I said that the sporangium are housed within the sporophyll. You now have sporangium. Sporangium. I hope you can see this. Yeah, sporangium. Then the sporangium now have spore mother cell. Then the spore mother cell produces a spore. Then the spore germinates into the prothallus. Having both achegonium, and antheridium. Antheridium, of course, produces the antherozoid. The anthegonium produces the egg. Then these two will now meet to form zygote or oospore. This grows into an embryo and the Lycopodium plant. So remember, all the stages from spore down to the gametes, these are the sex organs, and these are the gametes, are called the gametophyte, and they have n number of chromosomes, and these ones have 2n number of chromosomes. The shape of the gametophyte, let me quickly say this. The shape of the gametophyte of Psilotum is different from that, is different from that of a Psilotum. That of Psilotum, I showed you the structure of the prothallus. So this is how the structure of the prothallus is in the case of Lycopodium. So in the case of Lycopodium, it has a lobed crown, and a cylindrical body. And we are told that this cylindrical part of the prothallus is usually infected with a fungus, and that fungal infection sometimes results to the uh, distortion of this life cycle of Lycopodium, or the process gets arrested. That's how it was written. So it's a kind of results to uh, uh, distortion in the growth of the prothallus. The growth of the prothallus. So this is the prothallus. The growth and the function of the prothallus is usually affected by fungal infection. Is an exam question that somebody can ask you as students who are writing an exam. So just know that the group of Pteridophyta that has whose prothallus is usually affected by fungal infection is the prothallus of Lycopodium. Of course, the pterozoids, the Achegonia is usually found here. Then the anteridium is found around here. So when water falls, or probably during fertilization, the anteridium is released. I remember I said this is the sequence from the strobulus, the reproductive branch. You have the sporophyte, then you have the sporangium. So the sporangium is inside the sporophyte. The sporophyte is attached to the reproductive branch, which is called strobulus or sporangiferous spike. Then inside the sporangium, you have the sperm cell. So the sperm cell is safe inside the sporangium, then produces a spore. Then the spore germinates into prothallus, which I said looks like this. And the anterozoids are released from the anteridium. And once they're released from the anteridium, they locate the uh, Chegonia with the help of water and the chemical I talked about. So once they get into the Chegonia and right inside the venter, that's where fertilization occurs. And once fertilization occurs, of course, it bears the zygote or oospore, and the oospore develops into an embryo into a Lycopodium plant, and the cycle continues. But then there's something that happens in the case of Lycopodium. There's something that happens in the case of Lycopodium. After fertilization, something else happens in the case of Lycopodium. After fertilization, the zygote undergoes successive divisions. I'm specifically talking about Lycopodium now. The zygote undergoes successive divisions. These successive divisions will now result in the formation of two different kinds of cells, the outer cell and the inner cell. The outer cell will now result in the formation of what we call the suspensor cell that has no particular function it does, and the embryonic cell. The embryonic cell again will now undergo divisions to form two tiers of four different cells. The first two tiers form the outer cell, the other forms the inner cell. So the outer cell will now form the foot, the inner cell will now form the stem and the leaf, and later on form the root. And once the root is formed, then the foot degenerates. That is to give rise to the three main vegetative parts of the plant: the root, the stem, and the leaf. So let me repeat what I said. So I said in the case of Lycopodium, the zygote undergoes successive divisions to form two different kinds of cells: the outer cells and the inner cells. The outer cell forms what is called a suspensor cell. The suspensor cell that has no particular function it does, and the embryonic cell embryonic cell. So this embryonic cell also divides into two tiers of four cells, two tiers of four cells. The first two tiers form the outer cells, this form the inner cells. So this outer cell produces result in formation of root, this one result in formation of leaf, then stem, then later on still produce the root. And once this root is formed, the fruit degenerates. So that is how reproduction in Lycopodium occurs. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll stop here. If you have not subscribed, kindly subscribe and make sure you follow this class so that you'll be well equipped in the study of higher plants. All right, see you in my next class.